Governor Laska here, Minister, I too want to welcome you into the House today. Minister, I want to begin by paying tribute to Teach Tearmainn, who provide a very vital service of domestic abuse and violence in my own county of Kildare. Alongside emotional and informative supports, they offer refuge to women escaping horrific and traumatising situations in their own homes. The work that they do is really commendable. As unfortunate as it is, their services are indeed crucial in County Kildare. We need obviously more organisations like Teach Tearmainn, and we need to support them, Minister. Indeed, it has been a long-standing call from the Labour Party to increase the number of women's refuges right across Ireland. As anyone was watching up front on Monday night, we were all dismayed, I think, to hear there are at least 9 counties in Ireland that still don't have one, which is totally and utterly unacceptable. There's an extension of what is happening at the moment, Minister, is really a postcode lottery in terms of access to necessary supports for victims of domestic abuse. Every month when the figures are released, we're all devastated to see the number of people living in homelessness in Ireland. We know from numerous studies that domestic violence is one of the leading causes, if not the leading cause, of homelessness for women. The most recent figure shows that 3,445 women assessing emergency accommodation. The question is, how many of these women, I wonder, are there because they are escaping abuse and indeed violence in their homes? Moreover, victims of domestic abuse who can access refuge accommodation effectively exist in a form of hidden homelessness that isn't accounted for, indeed, in the national figures. Women's refuges offer incredible support to victims and often to their children, but there simply isn't enough capacity. At the very least, we need one in every county. Ideally, we should have a lot more. To feel unsafe in your home, what indeed should be your sanctuary, is a travesty. The lack of appropriate accommodation, refuges for survivors of abuse, as well as the housing crisis more generally, is limiting the options for a safe home for so many women. All the while, indications are that domestic violence is on the rise. In 2022, there was an 8% increase in domestic abuse incidents. Almost 54 incidents were attended to by Gardaí last year, compared with around 50,000 in 2021 and just over 44,500 in the year before. There are delays of 16 weeks for domestic violence applications, indeed some district courts. Support services are overwhelmed, and they have been for some time, as I've said previously in this House. In 2020, for example, Safe Ireland reported that it could not meet 808 requests for refuge due to the lack of available spaces. Men's Aid missed 630 calls to its helpline in 2021 due to resource constraints. Women's Aid's annual report for 2022 showed a 16% increase in contacts for their supports on the previous year, and the highest in their history for almost 50 years. I'm conscious that we're having this debate at a time where, just in the last couple of weeks, 2 separate incidents of violence against women have dominated the news. We continue to see an intolerable level of violence against women in Ireland, particularly in their own homes. There is no tolerable level. It is a scourge that needs to be stamped out. But the reality is that it happens and continues to happen, and we need to give the greatest support possible to victims. It is my sincere hope and the hope of the Labour Party that this new agency will improve those supports, and on that basis we are supporting this bill. A key point that we in the Labour Party want to stress is that the success of this agency rests on the budgetary and departmental resources allocated to both the agency and also a range of other related areas. The bill contains 8 functional areas for the agency. I won't have time to go through all of those, Minister, and the additional resources needed, so I just want to highlight a couple of those areas today. Under the bill, the agency will be tasked with planning, coordinating, monitoring the development of refuges and providing support to service providers, including financial support. Based on my previous remarks, this is a measure we very much welcome. I would reiterate, though, that to the extent to which the agency is going to be successful will depend largely on the resources available not only directly to the agency itself, but also through the agency to third parties. The agency will be responsible for budget allocation for non-governmental support services. That includes refuges, rape crisis centres and helplines. Close to 50 million was allocated by the Department of Justice and the Department of Children for related activities that will be transferring to this agency. A total review carried out last year showed that only 30% of victims' accommodation is up to the highest standards. That allocation is going to need to increase to go from only 30% of spaces being up to standard to 100%, which we should at least be the target. I would be concerned that this agency will simply become a scapegoat for the departmental failure to address the problem if it doesn't receive the required funding. There's also the issue of strategising and planning. The agency will be responsible for coordinating, overseeing and supporting government strategies. This is something that government really needs to get a handle on, particularly with regard to how the legal system deals with cases involving domestic abuse and gender-based violence. In March, the National Women's Council, in collaboration with the Department of Justice, produced a report that highlighted the absolute necessity for us to adopt a victim-centred approach that also ensures a fair legal process for those accused. Our present system is incredibly hard on victims. On Monday's Upfront programme, which I mentioned previously, we were all moved and horrified by the contribution of Sarah Grace, a solicitor and victim of gender-based violence herself. She clearly illustrated the ways in which our legal system can re-traumatise and be traumatic in itself for victims. This needs to be dealt with urgently. Victims can end up going through 3 different legal processes in their case: a criminal justice process, a private family law process, and indeed a public law childcare process. Legally, these works more or less in isolation from one another. The lack of coordination and cooperation between these processes means victims indeed suffer, Minister. There are situations where a judge in one part of the process hasn't indeed a clue what has happened or is happening in the other parts of the process. Gaps indeed emerge through the various processes where vital information has the potential to be lost. Ultimately, this harms the potential for a just outcome to be secured. I will finish shortly, but I just want to make a final and brief point on the State's relationship with civil society organisations, those that deal with domestic and gender-based violence victims. It is welcome that the chairperson and members of the board of the agency will have experiences in areas like policy implementation and service delivery and so on. However, it is disappointing that civil society organisations aren't mentioned in the bill. The National Women's Council has highlighted the importance of continuing the collaborative model between the relevant department and NGOs. The bill lacks a clear mechanism for this to continue. Civil society organisations are at the front line in supporting victims and have invaluable specialist knowledge and indeed expertise. I really hope that that isn't lost. I conclude, Minister, by reiterating the Labour Party's support for the bill. There are elements in that we would like to see strengthened, but ultimately I think this is a very well-intentioned bill, and the potential is there for a real game-changer in tackling the scourge of domestic and gender-based violence. I would again appeal to Government to ensure that the agency, NGOs and the broader care system are properly resourced and that a proper, well-thought-out strategy to deal with this issue is put in place. We want to see this bill and the new agency succeed, and we want it to be given the opportunity to do so.